Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Can I have your attention, please? We're going to begin the next session because we don't want to be late for the reception drinks at the end, which I can assure you all appreciate. So I'm delighted to kick off the last session for the day, session 4. And it's on a topic that we have discussed a bit about during the day and yesterday as well. AI transformation and the recalibration of work. The chair for this session is Adrienne Nieuwenhuis, to my right. Take it away, Adrienne.
Oh, there's a bit of sort of theatre there. Take it away, Adrienne. Thank you. I'm just waiting for a few more people to get their seats. So yeah, in the conference today, we've actually heard a lot about AI. You can't open a newspaper without seeing something about AI. And as a regulator, what you've been hearing from us mostly about AI is the integrity issues, that side of the house. Whereas the purpose of this panel session this afternoon is to shift that conversation away from the integrity and the challenges of AI in our worlds of higher education to what it means for productivity and skills and workforce. And therefore, if we're thinking about that, you know, we are the producers as a sector, we are the producers of the skilled workforce, well, certainly a component of it with our vet colleagues. What does it mean for our sector, our courses, the way we do our staff, the way we teach? What does it mean? So I want to shift the conversation away from the negatives of AI to the opportunities of AI. And we have a wonderful panel with us today, all who can speak from quite different perspectives, but from a workforce perspective. So immediately beside me we have Professor Barney Glover, Commissioner of Jobs and Skills Australia, who brings us that big picture, skills, economic workforce, public policy perspective. Next we have Dr. Carolyn Smith, Executive Director, Centre for Education and Training at the AI Group. So that's where we're starting to bring in a peak body and their membership perspective. And finally, we have Monique Hamilton, First Assistant Secretary, Group Operations, Defence Digital Group. So a very, very direct employer perspective. So the way this panel is going to work is very similar to previous panels. Each of the panellists giving an opportunity for a short presentation, commentary, from their perspective, and then I have a few challenge questions for them, and then we'll open it up to Slido for broader questions and answers. So once again, get your iPhones and iPads up and running and start sending me through some questions. So Barney, over to you.
Thanks so much, Adrienne. It's great to be here at the TEQSA conference. I think it's the first TEQSA conference I've been at for a while, and great to see an audience of this scale and still here after Alec Cameron and the Minister were so brilliant in the last session. I sat through that, Alec. I was very impressed with the conversation, very interested. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of Jobs and Skills Australia, primarily because we, of course, have spent most of the last year working on the likely impacts of generative AI on the Australian labour market. And in fact, it was one of the first pieces of commissioned work when I began as the JSA Commissioner, early part of 2024, from the then Minister for Industry, Science and Resources to ring me and say, we have got to get deeply into the likely impacts of Gen AI on the Australian labour market, and with an eye on technology more broadly, and particularly agentic AI, which emerged pretty significantly through the consultation and the various roundtables and discussions we had during the course of developing our report, which we released and which you've all read in detail in August this year, and in fact, particularly importantly timed to be released just before the Economic Reform Roundtable chaired by the Treasurer and particularly to provide some context to that panel about all of the things that Adrienne's referred to, particularly productivity. The Productivity Commission's already reflected in their report prior to the Economic Reform Roundtable about both regulatory issues around Gen AI in particular, low risk, low reg, high risk, high reg sort of framing, and also some early modelling of likely productivity benefits to Australia from a variety of assumptions around breadth and depth of AI adoption. But critical to all of that is understanding, well, what difference will it make to the labour market? And I think contrary to a lot of the speculation in the media, our report, which was a very detailed evidence-based analysis at occupation and at task level across the skilled occupations, almost 1,000 occupations under the Australian classification system, looking at to what extent will we see those tasks and those occupations either augmented or automated by virtue of access to generative AI. And we produced augmentation scores and automation scores to reflect that. In fact, one of the most popular portals on our website at the moment is where people go on and put their occupation in, and it generates their augmentation score and their automation score. And I was at a conference with Deans of Education the other day, and one of the slides I put up was all of the various classifications of educators under ANSCO and what our analysis is showing. Fundamentally, of course, we're suggesting there's going to be a great deal of augmentation of occupations in our labour market rather than automation. And that's contrary to some of the challenging comments made, particularly by the tech sector, about the level of disruption to the economy. There will be disruption. So we are in the midst of a technology revolution. It is happening. We need to engage with it. And one of the key messages from our report was to say we need to give Australians agency to actually engage to their full capacity in what will be a very disrupted labour market in the future. But importantly, to frame that around augmentation more so than automation. We have an opportunity to guide our future here, but we need to intervene. One of the recommendations we made, which I think broadly has been picked up if you look at the National AI Strategy released just recently, one of the very key recommendations we made was the important role of the Commonwealth in stewardship. This is to convene, to bring together, to set strategy, to address some of the challenging aspects of the introduction of Gen AI, as well as managing Gen AI across the labour market more broadly. Certainly to look at it in the context of government services provision and the non-market sector, which is crucially important to Australia, our biggest growth part of the economy. So those elements of planning and strategy have been picked up by the Commonwealth, and I think importantly coupled with what was our other big set of recommendations, which dealt with how do we upskill Australia. And so it's valuable to be in this room today with people who are committed to upskilling Australia in a whole raft of ways for what is a very dynamic labour market. Our Jobs and Skills report, something else I know you've all read
He's going to test you at the end.
Which we released, and we're releasing in each state and territory at the moment. We just did Perth today with our Jobs and Skills report. But we do our decadal update on employment projections, showing exactly what we anticipate seeing. We're going to see growth. By the way, when we overlay various scenarios around scale and depth of adoption of AI, the labour market growth projections remain. They change the rhythm, but the overall decadal view and the 5-year view still shows significant growth in employment, significant growth in skilled employment, particularly higher education qualifications as well as VET, and something we need to get right in our economy. And of course, this shift between the producing and the service sectors, the market, the non-market economy in Australia continues to dominate the next decade and beyond. So in that context, artificial intelligence and upskilling Australians is crucial. It needs to be broad, it needs to be comprehensive. One of the other things I often comment upon before I hand over to Carolyn and Monique is what we see happening in our region at the moment. Across Asia and elsewhere in the world, we work a lot with the OECD and the ILO and the World Economic Forum about approaches to AI. I'm speaking in Africa in the next couple of weeks about a similar topic. It's a very interesting set of strategies and urgency around uplifting AI capability and digital capability. You've got countries that are looking within 2 years to uplift the AI literacy levels of all educators. in school system, vocational training, higher ed, to be AI literate, let alone competent and fluent within 2 years. You're seeing countries are offering significant amounts of free training broadly in the community to uplift AI skills. But there are challenges, and Carolyn and Monique might comment upon this, which we don't want to ignore. Our report touched on some of those challenges. We're worried about entry-level roles, something that you contribute significantly to through the young people in particular, and those reskilling through your organisations into the Australian labour market. We're not seeing any impact yet on entry-level roles, but we will. It's happening elsewhere in the world. We need to account for that. We need to give those entering those roles the capacity to manage an AI-infused, technology-rich, digitally enabled future. Worker use of AI. I'm sure Carolyn will touch on this. This is a democratisation in terms of technology revolution. People are using AI whether their boss knows it or not, with all of the challenges that that presents. A certain amount of play and engagement is vitally important, but we need to understand the challenges of that. And our report also highlighted some labour mobility and gender and also First Nations challenges if we are not doing this well, particularly the way in which some areas are going to be more highly impacted than others. And if you look at traditional labour mobility between those areas and other areas of the economy, women more impacted, and they tend to move into other areas likely to be impacted. So we've got some labour mobility challenges to deal with, but huge opportunity. I'd like to get into some of the questions about what we do about it, not just in terms of managing the way AI is being used in the education and training sector, but how we're ensuring that our graduates are going to come out of your institutions ready for a future-proof career in all of the ways we imagine careers of the future with the AI skills that they need.
Wonderful, thank you. So as I said, we'll do the panel presentations first and then we'll have some questions. So Carolyn, your perspective.
Thanks very much, Adrienne. And great to be here. Thanks so much. So I'm from Australian Industry Group's Centre for Education and Training, and we focus on education and training as a driver of productivity, of competitiveness, and ultimately prosperity. So that's the lens from within Australian Industry Group that I come from. But what we know is that many businesses are actively integrating AI, or they're thinking about how and where to best leverage it. But actually also there are a lot of businesses that are sitting back and waiting and watching, and so in Australia our take-up is lagging behind many other countries. So I think that's important context. So at Australian Industry Group, we're the largest industry association, and we represent the interests of more than 60,000 businesses. And so that is across a range of different industries: manufacturing, construction, technology, defence, care, logistics, and more. So we hear a lot from our members about what's going on. And so some messages that we hear that I'm sort of keen to reflect in my comments is really to focus on 3 points. So AI is an opportunity. It's not a threat. Digital skills are important, and they're more important than ever. And the third is just the importance of connecting education and training with work, because to keep up, we really need our skills and education systems to work properly, and so the more connected to the workplace we can get, the better outcomes there will be. So thinking about AI as an opportunity, we've already talked about the everyday media reporting about AI and jobs, and research like JSA's research and others. We're really highlighting that in the short term at least, there'll be an augmentation, not a replacement of roles. But I think also in thinking about this conversation, it's well known in Australia that we have lagging productivity. And productivity is important, because that's actually how we maintain our living standards. So we can't ignore the importance of productivity and AI as an enabler. And we do see that there's a link between low productivity and low AI adoption so far in Australia. But of those businesses that we do know are getting on and implementing, they're already seeing benefits in terms of they're working with their customers in efficiency, safety, and also productivity. And they're treating AI sort of like any other technology. So they're looking at looking at it in a way that other technological advancements have been introduced. And so that's thinking about strategy, that's talking to stakeholders, and it's talking to staff. And then implementing in ways that are in alignment between strategy and the tech. So I think it's really important context. And technology changing work is not new. AI dates back to the 50s. But if you sort of think about the history of work, technology to some degree has had big implications for work, and often disruptions, and we need to equip ourselves for that. But it's not something that's new. And so for the transitions that are coming, again, it's about equipping ourselves to be ready for that, and skills and the work that all of you do is really, really, really important in that. So that takes me to digital skills being more important than ever. So digital transformation is driving a lot of change, and AI is part of that, but it's not the only part of that. At Australian Industry Group's Centre for Education and Training, we, for the last couple of iterations, have been the local partner for the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, and the latest version of that was released earlier this year. And it identified 5 macro trends. So that was technological change, economic uncertainty, sort of geopolitical complexity. That's my words, I think, maybe not theirs. I think there was a slightly different language, but green transition and also demographic shifts. But broadening digital access is the most significant transformation that was highlighted there. But at the same time, skills are identified as being the biggest barrier. And so in that global study, 63% of employers identified skills as a major barrier. And so just the research also talked about the fastest growing skills and the most in-demand skills. And I think it's really insightful to share that. The fastest growing skills were all in digital areas. So machine learning, AI specialists, quite technical tech skills. But the other area was what I would call core human skills, but analytical thinking, leadership, adaptability, all things that were perhaps not the fastest growing, but they were the most in demand right across the global survey. And when you think about those general skills as well, they're really important in being able to take some of the opportunity that will come with AI, but also be able to respond to it, and that that critical thinking, it will be, and adaptability is incredibly important in that. That research also showed that 7 in 10 Australians are anticipated to need to upskill or reskill in the next 5 years. And another Australian Industry Group survey was also talking about skills being a barrier in the Australian context. So that is something that's definitely been a recurring theme. And one thing that I did really want to highlight was the importance of foundation skills. And that means language literacy, numeracy, and digital is sort of how we think about that in the Australian context. And this sometimes surprises people, but for about the last decade at Australian Industry Group, we've done surveys of employers that show a really high number of employers report that to a certain extent, low levels of literacy and numeracy are a challenge in their workplace. And the last survey showed 9 out of 10. And that's either a significant issue in their workplace or sort of something of an issue. And the impacts of that are around productivity, around communication. There's safety implications of that as well. So that sort of really highlights the importance of, not only technical skills, not only sort of some of the general skills that I've talked about, but the absolute foundational skills, which you could call them learning to learn skills. And really the skills that mean that people have that. That baseline to be able to, continue to upskill and reskill. And then the last thing I wanted to quickly talk about was the importance of connecting education and training with the workplace. And we strongly advocate for deepening connections between education and training and work. And that's important for productivity, but it's also important for graduate outcomes. We support earn while you learn models, and in vocational education and training, apprenticeships and traineeships, very long-standing models that really facilitate that connection. In universities, work-integrated learning. And again, we've done a lot of work in thinking about that over the years as well. We've also been really, we've been advocating for, but also running pilot projects or supporting pilot projects around degree and higher level apprenticeships. And that work has arisen because often employers will tell us that it's not the sort of the skills that come from a vet pathway or from a university pathway that are more important than the other. It's actually often both. And so that's sort of been the genesis of some projects that we've run in that space. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And our last speaker, Monique.
Hello everyone. Pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. So I'm really bringing the employer view to this discussion, and there are many reasons for AI adoption. For the Department of Defence, our mission is to defend Australia and its national interests. In order to do that, we obviously need to keep pace. Our potential adversaries obviously keep pace. We see examples of that on a regular basis, but also in order to partner with our allies across the globe, we need to be keeping our workforce at the leading edge in adoption of tools such as AI. In addition, the Department of Defence is enormous, and in fact, we probably have most occupations represented somewhere within the department. The adoption of AI once was in sort of very niche areas of the department, quite specific roles and functions. Now, at a baseline level, we need our entire workforce across every occupation to be able to engage with these tools. To some of the earlier comments, it's not about savings in terms of reduction in workforce. For the Department of Defence that need to have speed to deliver new capabilities and stay on the front foot, speed is the answer. So we need to automate and use the tools available to us to do that 80% of the grunt work and free up the skills in our workforce to, at the end of the day, take the decision, because there should always be a human in the loop, but also to do the deeper thinking that is required across the department. So using AI to really automate and drive speed across all of our occupations is a major factor for Defence. We once saw, as I said, things like data mining, programming, analytics, in very few aspects of the department, and everyone else sort of leaned on those areas. We are now having to spread those skills. We've been leveraging our platform partners. So those who provide us with these tools are helping us upskill our existing workforce. And then we have at the other end the newcomers to our workforce who bring that fresh perspective, that absolute curiosity, and work alongside some of our longer term workforce members to help speed up the adoption and the way that we can leverage what AI can bring. Defence is a unique environment, so our use of AI is also contained to our environment. Sovereignty and data security are paramount. So our use of AI is predominantly contained to the defence ICT environment. That helps us obviously manage some of the risks of rubbish in, rubbish out. We can't have it sort of leaking our information or dialing home. So that does also contain it in terms of the context that the AI can bring to our problem solving. And so humans in the loop in that regard play a really important role. Industry. Defence work with industry across all sectors to provide specific services, to build capabilities, etc. I myself work in a role that is heavily engaged in negotiations and contract management. When we're approaching the market for any aspect of industry to end up being competitive, they have to be adopting AI and bringing that to the table. They would simply not be competitive in order to either compete financially or to be able to bring the volume and skill required to meet Defence's needs if they were not. So that is a little bit about our experience in Defence and our adoption of it. Upskilling our workforce, we are at the beginning of that journey, but we absolutely need to gain speed, and we need all the newcomers to our workforce to bring that baseline level of skill. They obviously bring their expertise in terms of their particular degree or background, but they have to come with the fundamental basics of how to engage with AI.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, the questions are coming thick and fast, so I don't know if I need any of my Dorothy Dixes. And I'm actually going to start in the middle of the queue of questions, so yes. Because I would like to bring the conversation back to, so what does it mean for our curriculum? What does it mean for our practices as higher education providers? So we have a question here that's just disappeared, which was effectively about saying that the panel was always talking about skills, but what does it mean for curriculum? So if we're going to get the skills that we need, what do we need to be doing in our curriculums to ensure that? Who wants to take that first?
I'm happy to
Barney?
jump in. First of all, I wanted to pick up, I'm going to answer a different question first.
Of course he is.
Monique made a very good point, and I'm looking at, everyone's looking at these questions. There's really interesting thematic running here, which is, this is really challenging. What about all the privacy, sustainability, environmental issues, all of those things? So we should get to some of that.
Yep.
And Monique touched on it in the context of the Commonwealth. But I wanted to pick up the industry connection piece, 2 examples in the last week, where I've been at big events talking to industry partners about, and AI comes up. It always comes up, driven by industry, both in the transport logistics space, very big companies. The first one talked about how important it's been for them to appreciate the criticality of a multi-generational workforce, because their young people are coming in with AI skills. And they're coming into a workforce where the older workers don't have AI skills. Anxiety, concern. They're in an environment which is an enterprise system, so the LLM is controlled, so you don't see leakage. They want to have people upskilling each other, and they've transformed the speed at which they are developing AI skills, and they're expanding their workforce. The second one, another big logistics company in Australia, and they're looking at expanding their workforce because they have data that they're now going to commercialise using AI skills. And again, they're seeing young people particularly coming in that are not just digital natives, they're AI literate and AI fluent to some extent. So yes, we have a lot of challenges, but it's already happening. To get to the curriculum question, And I was at a Dean of Education forum the other day, and one of the comments I had about, you've got to make sure all of your initial teacher education graduates are AI literate. The comment was, well, we have nowhere left in the curriculum to fit something in on AI. I think you're missing the plot.
Yeah.
Right? This is about embedding AI across the curriculum, not particularly focusing it as something different or adjunct to. I think there are two really important ways. I noticed David Turvey's here, so he'll talk about ATEQ a little later. But we've got the ATEQ and the Jobs and Skills Councils that are going to have a crucial role to play, I think, in engaging with this parts of the tertiary education system. And on the part of Jobs and Skills Councils, how do we reform training packages? How do we incorporate artificial intelligence? I mean, I've spoken to apprentices in workshops in Perth, automotive apprentices using AI, and they're better apprentices for it. So it is permeating broadly, and we need to make sure young people comprehensively have that opportunity. ATEQ will have mission-based compacts with universities. I hope they engage with universities about how AI is going to be incorporated in curriculum, in courses, in programs, in graduate attributes, in foundation skills, in the broadest context of that. So I'm not dismissing for a moment the challenges. They're real. And one of the reasons they're even more challenging at the moment is we have so much hidden use. Our report identified this extensive hidden use of AI because bosses, managers, supervisors are not yet acquainted enough with it to engage their workforce, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. If you're a big tech company or a big finance company or big transport company, you're beginning to grapple with it. If you're the Commonwealth, you're beginning to grapple with it. But we need that broadly across society. I think our AI strategy for Australia is a step towards answering the question, why haven't we run AI literacy short courses for the general population? By the way, you can find them if you look hard enough.
Yes, so there we go. A really good example of someone who wants to answer the question they want to answer rather than the question that were posed. But that's okay. That's right. And then we could get into AI hallucination where, is anything we're saying really, really true? Yes. But anyway, it's a bit too much existential sort of arguments late in the afternoon. But along those themes, I was interested, Caroline, when you talked about foundation skills and digital literacy. Because I wonder whether we need to even turn those sorts of things on their head. When you talk about what we're expecting, people in the workforce to have, and I'm not trying to in any way take away from those foundational skills and those really important skills, but I do wonder if we are at a point in time where we've got a language problem where what we think we're talking about and what we should be talking about have changed. And that digital literacy is now taking on much, much more the aspects of critical thinking, critical analysis, being able to recognise what the output of AI and whether it's good, bad or indifferent, or how to most effectively use that in a workplace. So any more comments? Oh, Monique, I see you nodding as well.
It is a really... we could go very deep on this. So the outputs of AI are one thing. The skills in order to ask the right questions is probably the more important thing. I have learnt through my early endeavours to upskill myself in AI that prompting is not as easy as it seems. You need to think long and hard, and then you need to see what it brings you and refocus and reshape. In terms of curriculum, and I'm certainly not the education expert in the room, but I think back when I started in school 40 years ago, I relied on an out-of-date 3 to 5 year, at least old encyclopedia in the library. It's been 40 years since we had the internet. I've got 3 daughters. The only way they do any of their homework is through research on the internet and AI. That is the generation that is coming through, and it is the way we will solve the big problems.
Caroline, anything to add from what you're hearing from your members?
Look, I think thinking about how we define digital skills, how we define AI literacy, there's a lot of conversations about sort of how we do that, and we've sort of now in Australia adopted the EU standard around that, which, I think we just needed to sort of make a call as to kind of what to be going with. Thinking about the curriculum question, I really agree with Barney's point about embedding is really important. It's not something that's separate. I think it is really, really important that it is embedded. I think that, digital skills alongside, there's sort of the basic literacy and numeracy skills, and how we approach foundation skills in Australia is that, language, literacy, numeracy, digital. When you get to digital, I think it is multi-layered because within that, you've got sort of really quite, technical digital skills. You've also got, generalist technical skills, which are probably the kinds of things that would be very relevant for someone who's already very experienced in the workplace and they need to sort of upskill, based on the new technologies that are coming through. But then you've also sort of got the very foundational aspects of digital skills as well, sort of alongside the sort of literacy and numeracy skills. So, it's not... The language is important, and I think it's important that we do recognise the complexity of that as well, because, when we talk about, digital skills, it's a really broad spectrum of things that we're actually talking about. But I think what we do know as well is that, all industries, are being, it's relevant for all industries to different degrees. But the upskilling challenge is also relevant right across industries as well. And so just really keeping a sharp focus on, ensuring that we support the technical uplift, but also keeping those foundation skills as an important aspect is really important, and it needs to be appropriately supported and funded. So,
Barney, with your JSA hat on, your ATEC hat on,
Yep.
and your ex-Vice Chancellor hat on, okay, so they're all sort of nicely loaded up for you. Remember the notions of graduate qualities? Mm-hmm. Where do you think they are now?
I think this is a really interesting moment to reflect on the attributes of our graduates.
Yes.
I'm sure all universities are. I think Carolyn's point a moment ago around, and we're seeing it in all of the work we do on collecting data on recruitment activity on scale. And I think there was an OECD report a few weeks ago, and again, by the way, it was about 400 pages long. So what did I do? Ran it through Copilot, because no one reads a 400-page report anymore. So yes, we can use AI and get great value out of it really quickly. But the thing we're noticing more and more is those human skills are critically important, more so than ever before, number one. And secondly, we're seeing an increasing amount of recruitment on the basis of skills and not credentials and qualifications. And that's a worldwide trend. And it's not devaluing our credentials, but it's saying, and our qualifications, but saying, are they still a proxy for what we need to know in a transitional context as we transition to a more AI-infused future? But what's really critical, I think, are the graduate attributes. And I've said on many occasions since we released our report, in fact, I use a quote from one of our tech roundtables that David and I co-chaired, where one of the representatives, senior person from one of the big tech companies on the roundtable, who did an arts degree in 1990, and he said, I only now know how valuable it is in the AI future that I am part of driving, because of all of those skills that are embedded particularly through our humanities, arts and social sciences degrees. So there's a renaissance opportunity here, because that is so important to our future, because AI can help with some technical skills. And so increasingly business are saying, well, give us the skills, but these attributes, which I think universities and our great TAFEs and vet providers are crucial to deliver graduates with those attributes. So I think it's more important. I agree about AI literacy, digital literacy is a crucial part of foundation skills. We do have a challenge in Australia, as Carolyn said, around adult literacy and numeracy. We should not for a moment back away from that. JSA will release a big report on that next year. that I think will be challenging for Australia to realise just how difficult that context is for us. But no, let's not back away from... And by the way, I should have also said about curriculum reform as a final comment. It is not easy. So I acknowledge the comments coming through that say, where can we fit it in the curriculum? And you can flippantly respond and say you embed it in everything you do. But there's an overlay here of professional accreditation and professional societies, professional bodies who control a great deal of what happens in our curriculum across so many of our programs. I think it's going to be vitally important to ensure that we engage those professional accrediting bodies about what an AI-infused future will look like, and to ensure that they're thinking about their graduate attributes that they believe are important, not just the ones that employers are increasingly telling us are so critical.
And sorry, I think that might be you, but please chip in. I've got a wonderful question here from, I suspect, a student in our audience. Given that some of the comments that have been made about the capabilities of students coming in, whether they've been taught or because they're just exploring it themselves, where do you think students fit in sort of co-designing curriculum, co-designing attributes, because of their own, sort of digital skills?
I believe it's crucially important that students are involved in co-designing the curriculum, co-designing the interventions in the curriculum. And I think if I was a student in 2025 in a university, I'd be saying, well, I need to come out the other end from this wonderful experience with the skills I need to flourish in what is going to be a complicated labour market. So I think they should be part of the co-design. And I think third-year students can influence first-year curriculum. First-year students understand the student experience from a fresh perspective. From my view, the more we do of that, the richer the curriculum is. And from the industry partners I'm listening to, they're seeing the digital natives making a difference in the workplace already. So let's get with the zeitgeist a bit.
Yeah. Mon, do you have a view on that? When you're working, recent graduates or, new recruits?
Well, we're definitely relying on those newcomers to our workforce to help us pick up pace in terms of our use of AI across the department. I would say to some of the points around the other skills that you need still, being absolutely critical, AI will give you an output. It'll give you an answer. It'll give you a data set. What you do with it is still down to us. That well-rounded individual with the other skill sets to go alongside it is important. But in order to have the ability to get there at pace, leveraging AI for the fundamentals and the basics that otherwise consume us just makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And Carolyn, same theme. You talked about work-integrated learning, because that's another way where connecting students into the workforce more quickly will have greater outcomes.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And there's, there are a lot of different ways to do work integrated learning. There's my team has run some scholarship programs where that's been connecting employers with students and doing 12-week placements sort of in workplaces, and those have had fantastic outcomes for the employers involved and for the students. I know that there's people out there looking at how AI can be used to support work-integrated learning as well. So there's some really diverse models and diverse approaches out there. I think, and as I indicated earlier, we're really supportive of approaches that are, looking at degree apprenticeships too. And, in an example that in South Australia that we were sort of involved in from the get-go, it won a Universities Australia Future Builder Award earlier in the year. It was University of South Australia working with industry, and they sat down and they said to industry, what is it that you need? And from there was, it wasn't a very quick and simple solution. There was, they put some effort into looking at the education need. They looked at what it meant from an employment perspective, and that work is going into its third cohort of students coming in. There's more employers that are coming on board, and by all accounts, the students who are bringing the theory from their university study, and it's a Bachelor of Software Engineering. They're bringing the theory from that study, they're getting to apply it in the workplace context, and it's getting great results for everybody. It's the kind of model that, there are lots of different models, around the country that are emerging in that space. And what we really want to see is rather than having, pilot by pilot, we actually want to see the system get behind, and being able to have that kind of model happen with the support of the system rather than in spite of the system. And one of the biggest barriers from an employer perspective in doing that is it's actually a tax arrangement, fringe benefits tax, where they're effectively having to, if they're paying for the course, they're also having to pay fringe benefits tax, so effectively paying twice. So that's a big barrier to that investment. But yeah, it's kind of an innovative example. There's lots of those conversations happening right around the country, and we think that's a great thing, and we're really keen to see more of it.
Well, we've run out of time. There's a couple of very cute questions here about TEQSA's use of AI, which I will take on notice, and we'll make sure we'll come back to you with. But please join me in thanking our wonderful panel, Barney, Caroline and Mon. Thank you.
Fantastic topic. I think we could spend a whole day on that topic and to talk about the opportunities of Gen AI. Hold on. Thank you very much to the panel. That was a fantastic discussion, and also to Adrienne as well. We now have coming up the penultimate, the last panel of the day, and the penultimate mini segment. So the topic is no, it's not. The topic is co-regulation of the sector, building trust through transformational collaborations. And we have none less than the Chief Commissioner of TEQSA chairing this. This is Professor Kerri-Lee Krause. Thank you.
Step one is making sure the panel is where they need to be, and well done, panel. Excellent. Step two is to warn the panel that an indication of the weariness of an audience is the extent to which they are distracted by slight misrepresentations in the closed caption transcriptions. So I have been sitting in the audience, and from time to time, if you hear laughter at an inappropriate time, don't take it personally. It's just that there's a strange word up there that is representing something you've said, but not to alarm you. So, colleagues, we are on the home stretch, and well done you for hanging in there. We're almost there. And we have a treat in store, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment in the form of the panel. But this final panel session falls in a session that forms the third T of the theme of our conference, transformation. So for those of you studying your program, take a close look. We are talking here about transformation, and the title is Co-Regulation of the Sector, Building That Trust Through Transformational Collaboration. And transformation means a complete change or a marked change. So what we're going to reflect on is, and I'd like you to be thinking about, what needs to completely change or transform in this age of super complexity. We've talked a lot about the complexity of the policy, the regulatory, the legislative landscape. And we're all well aware of the media articles, the Senate inquiry submission, various commentaries pointing to the complexity, regulatory, legislative complexity we are experiencing in Australian tertiary education. Of course, we're not alone in dealing with that complexity. We've heard about other industries experiencing similar and we only have to look over at what's happening in the UK, for example, their most recent white paper on post-16 education and skills, to see that there is significant transformation and reform on the horizon there. But let's come back to Australia for a moment. And in this session, we wanted to bring together a panel that very visibly, and at the end of a session, and of a long day, it's important to have those visible reminders of the fact that we are talking to one another across a complex landscape. I'm not going to introduce each of our speakers because they're, well, they were up there anyway. Their titles are up there. If you stop looking at me for a minute and have a look at those, just study them for a moment. And in particular, for our students, or for those who might be international visitors or newcomers to the sector, if you are not familiar with the National Student Ombudsman or the Australian Tertiary Education Commission or the Department of Education, you're about to be treated to an introduction to each of these people. Read their bios there. But the point to this seminar, to this session, no, it's not a seminar, I promise it's not one of those. The point to this session is a conversation that we'll have. I've asked each of them to reflect on the importance of building trust through transformational collaboration across our agencies and our functions. If you are a close reader of titles, you'll see that it starts with the word co-regulation. And you should know by now that not all of these people are regulators, right? So I just make that caveat point to begin with. We're going to hear first from Saxon and then Mary. Both of them are regulators, so representing ASQA and TEQSA. It's a bit like acronym soup, so stay with me for a minute. And then we're going to hear from David Turvey and from Sarah Bendall. They are key operators, if you like, key colleagues in this ecosystem that influences your day-to-day experience as students and your day-to-day work. We want to understand what collaboration looks like. And then finally, I'm going to invite Jasmina from the Department of Education to also reflect. And the question that I've asked them to begin with is, what does co-regulation mean to you? And or, looking at the title of our session, why do you think transformational collaboration across our respective functions is so deeply and desperately needed at this point? So over to you, Saxon, to begin.
Thanks very much, Kerri-Lee, and it's great to be with you all for another TEQSA conference, and especially to be part of a conversation really about our system and with my colleagues here. So from a vet perspective, I guess I'd probably begin by acknowledging that our and a vet perspective and a vet regulator perspective, that our legislative frameworks do create some natural constraints when it comes to co-regulation for those of us that are regulators. But that certainly hasn't prevented us from collaboration, and I would argue, transformational collaboration, particularly in recent years. And I'll touch on that in a moment. Because I think it's also worth acknowledging that vet brings really unique characteristics to the tertiary system when we think about things like industry currency, competency-based outcomes, a highly diverse provider base. We have everything from very large TAFEs right through to really niche private providers. But we're seeing the same system-level pressures across all of those providers. We've got critical skills shortages that require both vet and higher education responses. We've got students seeking flexible pathways throughout their lives. And I think we heard really clearly in that last session that we've got employers that need the full spectrum of tertiary qualifications. So in these circumstances, regulatory or system friction isn't just inefficient. It's essentially a handbrake on the agility and the responsiveness that national priorities are really demanding at the moment. But I think maturity in how we see the system and operate within it is really needed, and it's much the same as we're expecting providers to mature their academic and corporate governance. I think we're, as I touched on at the start, we're already working really effectively together, including in relation to things like transparent decision making and a shared commitment to system outcomes. And I know from, ASQA and TEQSA's perspective, we've done some really detailed work, and most recently in our dual sector strategy. This is about aligning approaches, it's about improving regulatory effectiveness and reducing burden. And from ASQA's perspective, this also sits alongside a considerable regulatory maturity journey, both for us and for the vet sector, to really support building trust and enabling those outcomes. But that dual sector strategy is actually relevant to the whole of the tertiary sector, particularly when, as I touched on, the corporate and academic governance. So there's lots of ways in which we're really looking to bring that alignment and build that trust more broadly. I think we've got some other practical examples of that as well. From ASQA's perspective, we engage with our vet sector strategic forum, and in more recent times we've included other aspects of our system architecture in that engagement mechanism with the National Student Ombudsman, the Jobs and Skills Councils that Barney was referring to in the last session, and also with the National Centre for Vocational Education research, to really draw together those aspects of the system that are relevant to all of our peak sector bodies. And that's because we recognise that an agile, integrated and responsive tertiary system can't be delivered through siloed regulation or a siloed system. And I think this is also the case for the ATEC, and David will touch on this in a moment. While the ATEC is leading efforts towards a more joined-up tertiary system, it also has an initial focus on the higher education sector in terms of those mission-based compacts. So it's even more important that system stewardship is effective and really to ensure that we're all aligned with the longer-term vision and well-placed for the whole of the tertiary sector to deliver beyond the immediate needs. I'm sure you're going to hear some really common themes from all of the panellists because while we have different roles and different legislative responsibilities, we absolutely recognise that shared understanding for our roles as stewards of the tertiary system. And I'll probably just end on the session that we just heard from in terms of some of those challenges that the tertiary sector is really needing to find solutions to. And I think all of those really go to emphasising not just why transformational collaboration is needed, but why it's already occurring. And I think, Mary, you'll have more to say about that in terms of that from an ASQA and TEQSA regulatory perspective.
Thanks so much, Saxon. And as we move to Mary, please keep those questions coming in. They have been coming through the day, and now you have your chance. You've got all of these important people right here. People have been asking through the day, how are we all going to work together to avoid regulatory burden, share information? So keep the questions coming. Mary, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to be a bit provocative at the start and say I don't think that we have a co-regulatory system by design. To have that would in fact now require everything to be scrapped and rebuilt in a really intentional way where the points of intersection and the alignment of purpose could be built from scratch. I would say challenge me if you wish, but I don't think that is what we're working with. But what that means is that we have a profoundly compelling case for the need for effective collaboration, both between regulators and related agencies, to maximise the opportunities and to manage some of the risks that we have from this system. It reminds me a little bit, I have relatives who live on a station way out near Broken Hill, and if you've been out that way, you know that the way that a farmhouse is built is, or a station house, it's, you start with a few rooms and then you have relatives come to stay and you have, a couple of babies that arrive and you have a business set up on the side, and it builds a little bit like topsy, and I think that that's the sort of more the architecture of the system that we are in. But I think collaboration and what you can expect of us in collaboration is really important then. So it's about how we can steer the direction of the system in a way that is effective and purpose-driven, but also adds value rather than burden. And I'm not going to say much else about burden because I think we need to talk about the opportunities here. So one of the reasons that collaboration between our agencies is really important here is that it can facilitate innovation and agility. So regulatory requirements of multiple regulators and policy agencies could potentially constrain growth, transformation, maturation of the sector. And I think I would echo what Saxon said, that there is already really considerable work happening and proof of concept, I think, certainly as far as ASQA and TEQSA's work relates to the dual sector strategy that is really intentionally looking at how we can manage our regulatory work, our requirements, reporting, applications, timings, and also development work that we do across our sectors over coming years. To add value, to position the sector not just with less burden, but with opportunities and alignment that can help to deliver on some of those purposes that we need of people being able to build careers moving between vet and higher education in both directions over the course of a career path, and a system that can cope with and respond to that. You won't be surprised that I'll also say that one of the important opportunities is that cooperation and alignment can help us to most effectively manage some of the most important risks. So where risks and priorities are shared by regulators and related agencies, alignment of approaches and expectations for providers can facilitate much more effective and concerted responses. And we certainly need to have a sector where we have that clarity about the most important risks, the most important and timely responses that are needed to position the sector well as to safeguard that sort of quality and that student experience that we care about. Also, I think it's important to consider managing the intersections and potential overlaps. So consistency and harmonisation can really help with that, and I think that there are great opportunities for us there to simplify the regulatory environment. And I think that's mostly about focusing on the points of articulation rather than role distinction. So what you don't need here is for us to sit and tell you what our separate roles and legislation require, but to look at the points where they bump together, how we can smooth and capitalise on those points of articulation and make sure that we are very aligned. I think it's really important also for us to consider improving the focus on the impact or response of what we want to see. So to frame our work in terms of the desired impact. And there is a great deal of alignment in the desired impact of certainly the regulatory agencies here, the stewardship mission of the ATEQ, and then the kind of the complementary roles, I think, of the department from a policy perspective and the Student Ombudsman Office in terms of how the student experience growth and that kind of the value add for students is matured. And importantly, I think I want to bring it back to the fact that our cooperation as regulators and related entities is really important to supporting public trust and transparency. We need to be working transparency to address complex and significant issues, supporting public confidence that we are working in the public interest. And that, as we've been talking about all day, is a really, really important part of trust and accountability. So we were asked to kind of think about, what's one really significant contribution? And for me, it's about alignment of expectations and responses. And if we're doing that really well, you won't even notice, because it's about avoiding rather than creating complexity, to eliminating it before it becomes a problem and an issue for you. You won't notice, you'll just take it for granted because that's the way things should be. Okay, I'll leave it there and hand over to David.
Thank you, Mary. That's great. David, as the relatively newly appointed Executive Director of the interim Australian Tertiary Education Commission, I've heard a few people describing ATEQ as a regulator. Are they right? Tell us more about how you fit into the picture.
No, they're not right, but let me come back. I just want to do one quick thing before I get to that. Firstly, Kerri-Lee, your comment, we can't see the captions now which is really disappointing because that's been so much
They
fun.
were quite...
And I've been thinking about how to, like, I assume this is AI generated, so I'm trying to think about how I can muck with the AI and get to say something really interesting, but I'm afraid my brain's a bit
They've
dead at this time of
removed
the
it.
afternoon. I'll do my best to come up with something entertaining. I suspect I'm going to say what Saxon said, but in the reverse order. And to Mary's comments about, you wouldn't design the system this way. We have got the opportunity of establishing the ATEC, and so we're doing that now. So we do have an opportunity to kind of do things differently, and the government's clearly got some design features in mind. So I want to talk a little bit about that. The ATEC isn't a regulator. It is designed to be a system steward, and I guess just thinking about how the Minister has been talking to us about that. In particular, if you think about the role the ATEC will have in relation to universities and what we call their new mission-based compacts, these are designed to reflect government priorities. They're designed to reflect the Commissioner's priorities. The Commissioners will be independent statutory office holders under the legislation that we'll see next week, with everything in my body crossed. And they'll be independent, so they'll have a view about where the sector should be going, the system should be going. But then the other part of the mission here is the institutions themselves. So the compacts have to reflect the mission of the institutions. And so it's very much a kind of collective view about where we think the system should be going, government's views, the Commissioner's views, and the institutions themselves. And I think that's a critical part of the way we should be thinking about what the institutions together collectively are trying to achieve for the system. And I think that's going to take a different approach to thinking about how we work together and collaborate. And obviously, working with the regulators and sharing information is going to be a critical part of that. The other thing, one of the key things the government's going to ask the ATEC to do is to lead the tertiary harmonisation work, and I'm very excited about that. In my previous role at Jobs and Skills Australia, we did a lot of work in that space. But I guess that what that opens up for me is, again, collaborating with my colleagues in the same building in the Department of Employment Workplace Relations, with the states and territories through the National Skills Agreement, with NCVR. So there's a whole architecture around the VET system that we in the ATEC will need to be kind of working very closely with. So not only the unis, but also the VET system architecture. So there's a whole big collaboration piece there. And then more broadly, again, to refer to Barney, because he called me out twice, so I had to do the same back for him. Is that coming up? Yeah, good.
Nice work, David.
Good job. I can't.
Sorry, I'm just gonna take a moment here. I think over drinks tonight there might need to be a prize for the. Anyway, back to the script.
Right. Okay. So when Barney's finished taking me outside, the point I was trying to get to eventually is we talked a lot about what we call the skills system. Which in my mind is how we make sure that Australia has the skills and knowledge that it needs, both economically and societally. And the architecture there, Jobs and Skills Australia, the Jobs and Skills Councils, the migration strategy, international students, like there's a whole bunch of big pieces there. So I have been accused of being a megalomaniac in the past. I'm not going to try and take over all of those things, but it is really important for the ATEC to be thinking about its work in the context of the university sector, the VET sector, the broader skills system, the migration system, and how we think about all those things collectively. So that's what's in my mind. Schools, the school system as well. So that's what's going in my mind as I go into this role, is thinking about how we can help join up all those parts of this system. And I think to go to the question about how to do it, one of the things that's been in my mind a lot is about openness and transparency. So I've said to my team, I want the ATEC to be really open, really transparent, to be really engaging, spend a lot of time talking to people, which is what I've been doing in the 4 weeks or so I've been in this job. And that means we're going to have a lot of conversations about things that aren't necessarily government policy. The ATEC will be an independent statutory office, so we'll be talking about stuff and trying to think about how the system should change and how it should evolve. So I need, obviously, the Minister to be comfortable that we're going to be having those conversations, but also need the sector to be willing to engage with us in conversations, exploratory conversations, thinking about new ways of doing things and taking things forward. And doing that kind of in private, not in the newspaper, But, you know, kind of being willing to have those conversations with us and be genuinely co-designing.
Thanks, David. We're going to move to Sarah now because you're not a regulator either. So how do you fit into the picture, Sarah?
I am not. Should I even be on this stage? I don't know. But I do want to start by saying thank you to everyone here and virtually for sticking it out until the end. And you can't leave now because who knows what I'm going to actually say by way of the auto prompt. So why am I here? No, I'm not a regulator. The National Student Ombudsman is not a regulator. But I do think that regulation is incredibly important in any sector. I don't know if we have co-regulation. I challenge anyone to take on Mary. Full encouragement to do that through the questions. But I think that regulation, if it's aligned with the public interest, can foster trust, transparency, and can really drive high-quality service improvements. So the NSO, not a regulator, but it does play a role in the oversight system. And that includes supporting regulators and others in the oversight system to do their jobs. And that's because I think, as many of us have said, our jobs are essentially all aligned. We're all driving the same thing. So the NSO, what is the NSO? It is a complaints handling service. Our focus is providing complaints handling services to students who want to complain about their higher education sector provider. So we focus on achieving outcomes for individual students and can make recommendations about systemic improvements if they come up in complaints. So, you know, obviously so we've only been open since the 1st of February this year. That's another important thing to note. But in that time, we're already collecting lots of information about what matters most to students. Since the 1st of February, we've had 3,700 students contact us, and that's translated to roughly, probably from today, 3,050 complaints. So this is a really important data set that now exists across the country that we share with regulators. We're very transparent already about what we're seeing through our data to help us all make decisions. So for regulators, that's matters that might require regulatory priority. For providers, it might be things that are happening in your service that you didn't know were happening that you need to fix. So that's what we do. In terms of transformational collaboration, I like. Did it do it properly? It did. Damn. I like this phrase. I like it because it requires us to work together to drive enduring systems level change. That's how I see it anyway. And I think I'm the only one that's defined it. And I'm not even an academic, but there you go. So why I think transformational collaboration is needed right now is because students, we've heard from students. Did it say something funny? Ego. Okay. Well, aside from ego, students have told us that that services and the system need to do better. So through our complaint service, the phrases that we hear most from students are that they don't feel listened to, or that their education experience feels more transactional than transformational. And we hear every day from students in terms of how to do better, that they want services to be better at responding to complaints or incidents of gender-based violence, that they want more genuinely accessible services for students with a disability. So implementation of universal design principles, or just better approaches to learning adjustment plans. They want better implementation, better policies and better implementation of policies around recognition of prior learning, special consideration, a whole bunch of things. And I guess the other one that comes to mind is they want safer and more respectful learning environments. So this is why we all need to work together using transformational collaboration across our different places within the oversight system, but also within the sector to drive that key goal that we all have, which is to improve the quality and the safety of the student experience so that more students can participate successfully in higher education.
Thank you so much. Now, Jasmina, you and I promised one another that there'd be a conversation, so I'm starting it now with you down the end there. As the relatively recently appointed Deputy Secretary of the Higher Education Research and International Group in the Department of Education, you get to sit in the helicopter to some extent and see all parts of this ecosystem. What are your reflections on the importance of transformational collaboration and maybe co-regulation?
Thank you. I think I'm a week behind David, is that right? So what, 3 or 4 weeks in the job? Can I encourage you not to pay attention to that? I have an accent and it never gets it right, so you'll be laughing a lot, so please don't. There is a luxury of being new, and it only lasts for a really short period of time. And I'm trying to so recently in the job to call myself new and really just continue to observe and listen, which I think is really important. So I come to the Australian Public Service from a state government. So I've spent the last 15 years in the service delivery land. And it's too early for me to say I'm speaking on behalf of the Commonwealth Department of Education. So some of these reflections are my observations of what I have seen. So jumping in from, I've spent probably 6 years in the higher education sector as well at Melbourne Uni and UQ and state government. What I'm hearing is, or what I'm not hearing, is the human. At the centre of this. I'm hearing a lot of regulation, legislation, systems, processes, how do we work better? I'm hearing a lot of theory, and this is not a reflection of my panel either, but what I'm missing, again, coming from a state government, is the kind of, but what are we doing? What is the impact we're trying to drive here? Where is the human? Where is the person at the centre of this? The other part that I guess I'm missing is how do we make sure that everything we have designed in terms of systems and processes and regulation doesn't leave the most disadvantaged behind? Disadvantaged students, staff, how do we look after people who might fall between the cracks? I'm really hoping this doesn't... I'm so conscious now of that.
Just ignore it. We're listening to you.
Yeah. So I think these are the kind of things for me that I'm kind of lacking. What is the impact? What are we trying to achieve? What is all of this designed to do? And how do we make sure we take everyone on this journey? And it does come down to really respectful relationships. How do we interact with each other? It comes down to that human relationship. So I'll continue to observe and take a lot in, but these are the kind of early observations that I have.
Thanks, Jasmina. We have a couple of really great questions, and I'm going to just flick that first one that's been upvoted by 34 people. It says, when will ASQA and TEQSA merge? My question, and I love that, let's have honesty at the end of the day. My question to our two regulatory colleagues is, does ASQA need to merge with TEQSA to achieve tertiary harmonisation and to reduce regulatory burden? Both of you get a chance to respond. Do you need to merge to achieve these things?
I can give a filler response while Saxon thinks, because we're good at collaborating. So, the glib answer is if and when Parliament decides that is actually what is going to serve the public interest best. So that's a little bit glib because it's saying we can't answer that question for you. I think, though, that the question that I would pose behind that is our higher education or our tertiary education sector is extraordinarily diverse. It's even more it's diverse within the vet sector that Saxon and the ASQA team regulate. It's very diverse within the higher education providers that we regulate at TEQSA. And I wonder whether we are at a stage of maturity and alignment across those two sectors where it would actually add a real advantage to students, to the country, to the public interest and the things that we are trying to serve here. And I'm not yet persuaded that it is, but I do think that there's potential by forcing things together that represent such diversity of purpose, students, interests, the type of work that is delivered, that you could lose a lot. So that would be my starting point, is to say, what is it that we would be trying to gain? Because I'm not yet convinced that there's a compelling case about what would be better by merging the two regulatory models.
Saxon?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Kerri-Lee, and thanks for the question. And I agree with Mary in the context of it's strictly speaking not one we can answer, but I agree with what Mary has also said, but also where David was taking us around the role of the ATEC and where the opportunity is at the moment around system design, because I think I'd probably just simply offer that what we need to be contemplating here is what is the problem we're trying to solve. We certainly don't want to lead with a regulatory solution. I think we need to engage with where the design of the system is going, what's needed, and then when we've got a vision around that, regulation is the kind of thing that supports the system, it doesn't drive it. So I think, and Jasmina, you might have something to add there, but I think that'd be our response, certainly my response at the time. The other part that you asked though, Kerri-Lee, is it needed in order for tertiary harmonisation right now? And I think, look, I really would encourage those of you who haven't to engage with our dual sector strategy, because I think it was sort of reflected there in terms of, or there's another question from a dual sector provider. And, if you haven't felt the impact of that and the way in which ASQA and TEQSA are collaborating and the way in which we see our joint work moving forward, you certainly will, because we've really clearly articulated there what we will do, what you can hold us to account for doing, and the way in which we want to engage across certainly dual sector providers, but as I said in my opening comments, the aspects of that strategy that are relevant to the tertiary sector more broadly, and particularly as it relates to corporate and academic governance. So we do have a program of work associated with that moving forward, and it was very, very well informed by, in its design, by the input and the feedback that we've had from you up to now. So I would like to, really hook into delivering on that strategy.
Thank you. Jasmina, I saw you leaning forward.
I absolutely agree with what both of you said. It's really fascinating that the first thing we do is resort to a structural change, that we go to organisational mergers, rather than saying, actually, there is an opportunity here with a working relationship between the two agencies to innovate and to improve how we hold each other to account, and how do we actually make this work rather than resorting straight to, well, let's merge. It's fascinating for me that this is the human kind of reaction to perhaps something. Again, I think you said, Saxon, what are we trying to achieve? What is the impact we're looking for? What's not working? And I'm not sure we have really defined that. We've resorted straight to, well, let's merge.
I don't want to acknowledge the questions that are coming in. There are quite a few specific ones about resourcing, etc., for individual agencies. Really good questions. I'm not ignoring them. As we've said throughout the day, we will take those back as it relates to ASQA or TEQSA. But just for the benefit of this conversation, I'm keen to look at the more collaborative, cross-agency, cross-function elements. So I am just going to go to Sarah with a question that relates to working across NSO and TEQSA, because this is a question that has been raised. Can you give us a couple of examples, Sarah, of what you're seeing either working well now or opportunities for sharing data, information that for the providers out there and the students should give growing confidence that there is a very practical goal to work together.
Yes, and I should say that the setup that we have in higher education that has a separate Ombudsman service to a regulator is exactly the same in other sectors. So we're not special in higher education in any way in that respect. And it works really well, and it is already working really well. Mary and the team and myself and the team meet regularly. Mary's team will refer students to us who are seeking individual outcomes to complaints so that we can do our job. We are already referring to Mary and the team matters that come to us that we think show concerning breaches of the threshold standards or other potential systemic issues that we think TEQSA needs to know about. So that's as intended, and there's no duplication of activity there at all.
Yeah. David, I've had a similar question about ATEC, providers saying, and Mary, you mentioned this in your earlier presentation, opportunities for looking closely at synchronising reporting dates, sharing of data back of house so that providers don't have to repeat the provision of data. I'm just wondering, in your early thinking, David, what opportunities do you see for connections, closer connections in the work of, say, TEQSA and ATEC in terms of linking to providers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We have been thinking a lot about what sort of information we're going to need to do our work at the ATEC and designing a kind of performance framework and sort of indicators we're going to want to look at, which would then drive how we think about where the data is going to come from and how timely it is. So we're at the very early stages of that work. I think what's kind of come to my attention in that conversation is that there's lots of data already out there. We don't want to be adding to the kind of regulatory burden by asking for more data. We want to try and make the most of what data is already around, but we also want it to be faster because a lot of it's really, really slow. So thinking hard about how we can improve that, but also use new techniques and technologies and use the big linked administrative data assets that are available now through the Australian government, as well as AI and other technologies to bring disparate data sets together. And of course, we'll be working very closely with the regulators. I mean, we have to be careful about the distinction in data use between the purpose the data was collected for and regulatory activities. And we don't want to kind of breach that kind of that line. But clearly, the sector intelligence that we're gathering is obviously going to be similar with both ASQA and TEQSA. So we need to make sure that we're talking regularly about what we're hearing from the sector and how that's feeding into both of our work.
Colleagues, as much as we've all enjoyed this conversation, we are going to draw it to a close. So would you please join me in thanking our panel, first of all? And I am going to ask them to stay put, except for Saxon, who gets a special dispensation, because we're going to have a very rapid close of the conference. This is not going to be a lecture. You can relax about that. But I do have two important things to do. One is a thank you to all of our speakers. So thank you to each of our panel today, but to all of our speakers throughout the day for your contribution. Particular shout out to our students, not only the student panel, but also the student forum attendees yesterday. It's a busy time of year for our students, and we want to say a big thank you to them and kudos for your engagement. So a big clap to them. I also want to say a big thank you to our MC. Liz has done a super job of keeping us on track. Well done, Liz. And the NIDA team who have worked with you, that's been great. It's been my privilege over the last 7 to 8 months to get to know a very special team, and that is the TEQSA team. I really love working with them. They have done so much behind the scenes to make this 2-day event a spectacular one, and I would like you to put your hands together for the TEQSA team and the work they've done. Our conference organisers, Sofitel, I also want to go right back to the beginning of this day, and it would be remiss of me and each one of us to walk away from this sacred ground without acknowledging the welcome we received and acknowledging the privilege that it has been to step onto this country that has been cared for generations. So I would like to acknowledge that and those in the room for whom this is sacred country, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives, a special thank you for being such a key part of our heritage and our community. Final thank you to each of you. It has been such a rich 2 days and 1 day for those who've been here. I want to assure you again, the questions you've raised help us to understand what are the questions you have, what are the suggestions you have, what are the muddy points that still remain there, the obscure ones, and the burning issues. So while we haven't had the chance to go through all of them, I again assure you and thank you for taking the time to share them. So that was my first task. Second task is to say, importantly now, it's time to relax, to meet out at Sophie's Lounge for drinks, networking, and to bid you farewell, safe travels, and thank you so much again.